B.Sc Part 3 and respected listener, a very good morning and welcome all of you to today's lecture. Dear students, I will deliver today a very special lecture on outline of absorption spectrometer or important or basic features of spectrometer, which is selected from B.Sc Part 3 Paper 3 Physical Chemistry, chosen from Unit 3rd, titled as Spectroscopy. Dear students of B.Sc Part 3, once again, now may I have attention your please. First of all, I will repeat the necessary and basic fundamental conceptual of our previous lectures today, which is mainly related and concerned of today's lecture. The title I have mentioned on the blackboard, important features of spectrometers. In our previous lecture, dear student, we have delivered the definition of spectrum, spectra, and its further classification of spectrum. In order to define the definition of spectrum, when a beam of sunlight is now allowed into that is of diffraction grating or prism, the further transmitted light is now allowed to pass on that is of photographic plate, a various by the phenomenon of dispersion, a various bands in the form of Gibbs colors of sunlights in separate form are produced. By the process of dispersion, the various colors show in the form of bands. Such colorful bands are known as that is of spectrum. The plural of spectrum are known as that is of spectra. In our previous lecture, we have also expressed there are two types of the kinds of spectrum, in which firstly the major classification was emission spectrum and that is of absorption spectrum. Emission spectrum is the spectrum in which when extra energy or heat is provided to the highly possessed substance or highly possessed substance, the extra energy is now allowed to pass it into that is of radiator. Further transmitted light is now allowed to incident upon that is of photographic plate. In such a position, the spectrum is known as that is of emission spectrum. In the same sense, in the reciprocal of emission spectrum, in order to define that is of absorption spectrum, dear students, absorption spectrum is the spectrum when is provided extra energy to such substance possessing low energy. A maximum part of emissions or a maximum part of radiations are absorbed by the substance and rest part now allowed. A few part of the radiation is now allowed to pass into that is of further radiator, and that further is now allowed to pass into that is of photographic plate. In such a positions, such spectrum produced on photographic plates are known as that is of absorption spectrum. Emission spectrum and absorption is a spectrum further divided into continuous, discontinuous, further discontinuous spectrum further divided into its that is of sub two kinds spectrum, that is of atomic spectrum and that is of band spectrum. Atomic spectrums produced by that is of it is also known as that is of linear spectrum. Linear spectrums one can produce by using that is of atomic species present in that is of vapor and that is of gaseous phase. While in the case of band spectrums, which is produced by molecular species present in that is of liquid and that is of solid in liquid and that is of solution phase. Dear students, a very special after the discussion in our previous lecture, today I will deliver the important features of absorption spectrum. Spectrometer is the device. First of all, it becomes essential to define that is of absorption spectrometer. First of all, I want to remove the basic concept in your mind in which there are two types of the fundamental apparatus that will be used to define, that is of spectroscopy. First one, that is of spectroscope, and second one, that is of here, that is of spectro, that is of a meter here. Dear student, spectroscope is the device. Spectroscope is the instrument which is used to measure the 7 wavelength present in, that is of sunlight, in the form of, that is of Vibgyor. In the case of spectrometer, suppose in the way of, in the root of spectroscope, suppose we connect such a device like a prism, and that is of diffraction grating is now connected in the way of spectroscope. The 6 wavelength or that is of 6 lambda will be absorbed by, that is of prism, and in the case of rest radiations, single light will now be allowed to transmit and allowed to pass and into, that is of radio, in that is of a photographic plate, in other words to recorder. Such a instrument is known as, that is of spectrometer. I mean to say in compact form, once again I define spectrometer is the instrument device which is used to record, to note only, that is of single wavelength, single lambda of a single color. Dear students, first of all I would like to explain about the important features, parts of spectrometer. Dear students of B.Sc Part 3, spectrometer is not a single device, it is further connected. I have drawn on the blackboard, it's that is a fundamental diagram I have drawn on the blackboard. It is connected, it is made by, that is of 6 very small, that is of parts here, small, that is of device here. The layout program, the basic features of absorption spectrometer I have drawn on the blackboard here. This large, that is of spectrometer is formed by, that is of 6 minor instrument or devices here, in which first one let us try to discuss here. First one, that is of S1 denote here, that is the light source, which is further connected to, that is of part 2, device 2. Device 2 is known as, that is of sample cell and symbolized by, that is of T. Similarly, third one, that is of manochrometer, symbolized by, that is of here, that is of M here, which is further connected to, that is of detector 4, and the 4 is known as, that is of detector. Fourth is further connected with, that is of device 5. Device 5 is known as, that is of amplifier, or finally device 5, I mean to say, that is of amplifier is further connected with, that is of recorder here. Hence, by the connection back to back of 6 devices to produce a very large device, such large device is known as, that is of spectrometer. Let us try to understand one by one about the important parts, work and functions of these various small devices here. Try to understand here, that is the first one, that is the light source S. Suppose light source S, that is work. First of try to understand here the fundamental work of light source here, to obtain the fundamental, particularly obviously a specific radiations, such device which is used to obtain, to produce the specific radiations, such device is known as, that is a light source here. Now to produce spectrum, next one, to produce spectrum, dear student, first one, suppose we want to produce the spectrum of visible NUV, that is of near ultraviolet light, plus NIR, near infrared. In such a position, as light source will be used as closed, that is a closed tungsten filament, in that is a ordinary glass bulb. Next one, suppose we want to produce one, that is of recorder R for ultraviolet spectrum. Try to understand here, hydrogen or deuterium discharge will be used for the production of ultraviolet spectrum on recorder R6. In the case of IR infrared, suppose we want to produce here, that is of IR spectrum, glower lamp or next glower beam will be used here for the production of that is of IR spectrum here. Dear students, now tomorrow we will discuss about next part that is of 2 sample cell T. Thank you very much.